name is Sheridan Ruth, and I am here to welcome you home. This is the Exposed podcast. Where we reveal the body-based ways to ease anxiety, heal trauma, and create an empowered connection with love and money using nervous system regulation and a healthy dose of self-compassion. You're going to be really excited about today's episode. We're exposing the truth about mindfulness when you have experience of trauma in your past, what it actually looks like in real day-to-day life, and how to apply it. So me and my guest Michelle will be getting into the details of that. And a little bit about Michelle is that she has a master's in social work, a bachelor's in disability studies, and is also a Reiki Master. She offers counselling and educational opportunities from a holistic trauma-informed perspective. She aims to create wellness and balance through the integration of traditional counseling and mindfulness techniques. This approach has developed through her own journey of having an autoimmune decision, trauma, and anxiety. She offers practices and discussions that guide us to live a more fulfilled and authentic experience with self-compassion, and she believes strongly that trauma is a universal human experience that affects the body, mind, and spirit. She believes that addressing our suffering leads to a journey that is beautiful, painful, and ultimately reconstructs our fundamental meaning of compassion, humanity, and our place in the world. This conversation is really beautiful. It really did touch my heart. And you'll notice that we talk a lot about the healing crisis and what bouncing back from difficulties looks like as you move through life and as well as in your day-to-day. So if you are currently bouncing back from some of the stresses of life, from small stuff like your partner, just being a bit frustrating at times, or grief or hair loss or anxiety or entrepreneurship or anything like that, and you would like to find more ease as you navigate these things from a regulated nervous system, go ahead and go on to www.sheridanruth.com/expansion, where you can book a free 30-minute phone call and receive free coaching and support around your unique situation. At the end of our call, we will make sure that you walk away with some tangible steps that honor your time, your energy, and your finances as you move into the next version of your life and of yourself. While we're chatting, if we discern that my ease framework is the absolute best fit for you, we'll go ahead and have a conversation about getting you inside of one of my programs. So go ahead, find the link in the show notes right now, book your call, and let's dive in. Michelle, welcome to Exposed. I'm so excited to be chatting with you today, mostly because I think that you and I are going to get really, really real about what practicing mindfulness can be like when you haven't spent a lot of time in your body, maybe you have an experience of chronic stress or trauma, and how to wade through all of the noise of this beautiful buzzword, which is mindfulness. So wonderful people. Michelle has been practicing in this realm for about 20 years. And so we get to receive a lot of her wisdom today. I'm really, really excited. Michelle, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Sheridan. I'm really excited to have this conversation because I think it's a conversation we're not always having about mindfulness and trauma. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, beautiful. Let's start with the basics. How do you explain what mindfulness is, and how does it differ from meditation or energy work or awareness or any of those other words we use?
Yeah. So mindfulness really is a broader umbrella term that encompasses really being present and intentional in what we're doing. So my meditation would come under mindfulness. Energy work would come under mindfulness. Therapy could come under mindfulness. So it's more of this umbrella term about intentionality and what we're doing in terms of being really present with ourselves. I think most of us, when we've experienced trauma, get really disconnected from our bodies. And even just in our modern world, we get disconnected from our bodies. We're checking our phones, we're running from thing to thing, we're trying to sort of multitask, do side hustles, do all sorts of different things. And that sort of really pops us energetically out of our body. And when we've had trauma, it can be really, really difficult to live in our body, because lots of times, if the trauma was related to our body through abuse or neglect or car accidents or chronic pain or suffering, there's a sense that our body has betrayed us. So the idea of going back into our body can be quite scary in a lot of ways. And what I like about mindfulness is we can be mindful while we're cooking. We can be mindful while we're gardening. We can be mindful. So mindfulness is so many other things. It can be looking at the sky. It can be a gratitude practice. It can be exercise. It can be walking. It can also be breathing and then slowly moving into feeling more safe in our bodies. But it can really be anything that we're slowing down and intentionally doing versus racing through our life from thing to thing.
Yeah, I think, lately a lot of people have been coming to me and saying, Sheridan, how do I regulate my nervous system? And we can't do it without mindfulness. Like, yes, we can go to a yoga class, and yes, you can do a breathwork practice. And yes, you can heal your trauma and do all of these things. But without this missing piece of mindfulness, you're still going on autopilot through your entire day. And if you're not mindful of what state your body is in, what state your nervous system is in, then how do we know if it's regulated? Probably it isn't regulated, because yeah. You said something really important, which is it can feel like our body has betrayed us. And, maybe that stuck with me because I lost my hair when I was 7 years old. I have this autoimmune condition, and I can resonate and say there have been times in my life where I'm kind of like, I had looked at my hair and been like, oh, body, you have betrayed me. You have put me through an awful experience. Now I really actually enjoy the experience, but it had felt that way. You also have an experience with an autoimmune condition. Can you share a little bit about what your experience has been with your body and how you've come here?
So my autoimmune condition was my absolute wake-up call to discover mindfulness. So mine absolutely comes out of a history of trauma and not being in my body. I knew the moment that I was diagnosed with the autoimmune condition that it was because I had hated my body for so long. I had not known how to live in my body. I did not know how to be grounded. I had anxiety I can't remember a time that I didn't have anxiety. Like if you talk to me as a 3-year-old, I had anxiety. And so I was always this anxious person. I had an incident, probably about 10 years of my life, where I endured a lot of pretty intense bullying in a small community where I couldn't escape from that. And I have a history of sexual abuse in my past as well. All of this came out as anxiety, self-harm, disordered eating, like anything to try to give me control. And this is the way I see trauma as. So I came up with brilliant strategies that made me feel safe, even though they were an illusion of safety. So the anxiety gave me an illusion of safety. Me controlling my weight and my eating gave me an illusion of safety. Constantly saying I wasn't good enough gave me an illusion of safety. And eventually my body sort of said, well, if you hate me so much, I suppose we don't need to be friends, is the way I would sort of phrase it. And it started to show up as so much inflammation in my body and pain. And that's when I discovered meditation and breath work and energy work as well, because I knew I had to come at it from a way that wasn't intellectual. So even being trained as a trauma therapist, I intellectually understood the nervous system, understood anxiety, understood trauma, but had not actually integrated and digested what that meant for my system. So I was like, oh yes, trauma, and let's sit here, whatever. But then I would be freaking out inside. And so I had no semblance of what it was like to be grounded even. And so energy work gave me a way to be safe in my body. But I know for many other people that can create a healing crisis that doesn't make you safe in your body. And I will say that I did have about a year of healing crisis after I was attuned to Reiki, where I went kind of the other way into just full panic attacks all the time. But there was I had some knowing that I was back on the right path of some sort.
Yeah.
And it really made me realize how mindless I was, or how much even I lived in my head. I just intellectualized everything. If I could just learn about it, it would go away, versus actually embodying it. And I think this is the thing about mindfulness, is slowing down and being intentional about what you're doing, no matter what it's doing. You could be mindful about doing your taxes.
Yeah.
Versus this, oh my God, I have to do my taxes, and getting all flooded in that nervous system. And I'm also going to say, I still do it. So mindfulness, I think there's this illusion as well that you will just become a mindful person and that will be your state of being. And I want to dispel that myth. You will be mindful some of the time, and you will be mindless other parts of the time. And mindfulness is kind of the meta perspective of being able to at least watch yourself get activated in your nervous system and still choose to freak out sometimes, and other times decide to take that breath and say, I need to slow this down and be more mindful and intentional about what I'm doing, because this is not serving my trauma reactions through my nervous system. So then we start making mistakes. We start going into old patterns, and we start getting really flooded. And then we sure as heck can't sit down and do yoga or meditation or like calm our thoughts, because we're way too flooded.
Yeah. We're going to come back to a couple of things you said, because they're really, really, really good and really important. I want to highlight what you're saying about trying to control the things around you in order to avoid the lack of safety that you have inside. Beautiful listeners, when you do this, if you're in my world, this tends to happen. You do it when you try to control your partner. You do it when you try to control the outcome of your relationship. You do it when you try to control your sister and your best friend's life. And you do it when you try and control your finances to a point where you feel so constricted around them, or you don't let yourself have more than a certain amount, or you get obsessive about these things, or you can't take educated risks and things. You do this, and I know that you do this because you know that you do this. And what Michelle and I want you to know is that a lot of the practice, and I think of it like this, a lot of the practice is getting really happy when you notice that you have swayed from the path. And I just say, get really happy when you notice that you sway from the path, and just invite yourself back home. It's almost like you have this little being. You're the home, your body is the home, and you have this little being inside of you that runs around. And just like a happy little toddler, sometimes it like runs in the opposite direction. And you just have to be like, hey, buddy, yeah, you come back here.
Yeah, I think it is. It's about curiosity. And I think when we're in that constricted trauma place, it's really hard to laugh at ourselves doing that thing that we know is actually the opposite of what we were hoping for, right?
Yeah.
So it is about tending to our inner child and having some playfulness around it, because we're not going to get it right every single time. And it's okay to say, oh, I'm doing that thing again, but I'm aware that I'm doing it, right?
Yeah. And it can take time for the humor to come. If you're having a couple of bad days and then you kind of berate yourself because you're not, didn't find the humor in it. I want you guys to know that when your nervous system is dysregulated, humor and play and humor, it's just not a priority to your system. You're not going to get there. Like, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
First, the body needs to
Nobody
calm
is.
down. Nobody.
And nobody is. So I think there's this idea that some magical people have this ability to be mindful and other people don't have the magical ability, which just is not true. Every single one of us have a nervous system. Every single one of us are not in control of our fight, flight, freeze response. It happens when it happens. And brain biology wise, we actually do not have access to our neocortex, which is our thinking part of our brain. So there's no amount of thinking that can get you out of that flooded place. So
Pause.
you cannot,
Michelle, repeat yourself. Everybody listen, write it down.
You cannot think your way out of your nervous system response. You cannot, because it is meant to keep you safe. So thank you, nervous system. Thank you, neocortex, for keeping us safe. And we do not have access to the part of our brain that can play or be curious or have problem solving, really. It says, get me out of here. And so we do not have access to the part of the brain. But when we've calmed down, most of us judge, why didn't I think to do that coping strategy? Why did I not think to get into mindfulness? Why did I not think to do tapping or breath work or yoga? The reason why you didn't think it is because you did not have access to the part of your brain that would have made that available to you at the time. Because you're not going to sit down and do yoga if you're not safe and your brain thinks you need to run, right?
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. We're all going to get it printed on a t-shirt and read it every single day for the rest of our life. Yeah. On that note, you mentioned something just before about getting flooded. And I think that conceptually we can all, when we hear that word, we kind of have like an idea, okay, I kind of know what that means, or at least that's where my brain goes. Can you explain, like, how do you know, what is flooding? What is flooding of the system?
Yeah. So flooding is that nervous system. It really is the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. And it looks different for everybody. So for some people that might look really kind of manic, like you can't stop your thoughts. You're sort of racing, you're all over the place. You're really quite ungrounded and unregulated in that way. For other people, flooded is like, I'm starting to sweat and I'm getting cold and I'm getting chills and my heart's starting to race and I can't catch my breath and it feels a bit like a panic attack. For other people, we're not even necessarily aware. So some people are also like, just keep going, just keep going, just keep going. And their coping strategy has been to not look at any of that flood. So there's lots of people when they're flooded, just push through and work harder. And then there's other people who do like the fawn response, which is people pleasing and perfectionism. And that is what it looks like to be like. So suddenly you're around caretaking for everybody else, even though nobody's asked for your help in their life. And you're trying to go around saying, well, I know how to fix you and I know how to fix this. And I know how to, we're offering all this unsolicited advice. And we're trying to make everybody happy and we're trying to make everything really calm. So we all have different ways that we approach this. Some people get angry, some people get anxious, some people really feel it somatically and emotionally in their body. And everybody's really, really different. But I like to use this word because it often sort of comes over you in like a wave. So for me, I'm very emotional somatic. So I know it because I can feel the panic sort of overwhelm me. I can feel that I can't breathe and I can feel that I'm starting to do that, like, oh my God. And then my mind starts racing, right? And I cannot get myself back in my body, no matter how much, like I've meditated for years and I've done Reiki for years, but when I'm flooded, I'll lay in meditation and the thoughts are just going and the breath isn't calming down and the heart rate is still going, right?
Yeah.
So this is when I tend to do more active mindfulness. So I'll go and move my body instead. So I'll do yoga or exercise. I'll go out and walk. I'll connect with nature in some way because there's no amount of laying there and breathing that's going to get my mind to silence down. I also sometimes do tapping in these kind of situations where I can't get myself out of that frantic, flooded place.
Yeah. And it's also important to note that you can be in between them at different stages depending on what's happening. Like usually I would be like you, Michelle, and I would kind of like go into that emotional state. And my first thought, it would actually be, I'm going to think about this. It's the opposite of what I need, but I'll sit
Yeah.
and I'll write and I'll think and I'll ponder. And then there'll be other times in your life where I go into that people pleasing, or I'm like, let's just get it done. You just have to push through. And for me, it's really difficult because my partner is very much like, he's the avoidant. He's like, let's just, which is, I'm never there. I just don't go there. So I'm like looking at him and I'm like, you're so good at it. Like, what are you doing? I can't even conceptualize it. Um, and so it's really helpful to know that you might resonate with one and you need to have tools for when you're in that response. However, you also need to know your tools for when you're in your other responses. And I think that's also why, I don't know if this happens to you, Michelle, but I'll have clients and we'll kind of develop like their game plan and their practices, and they have the toolbox and the tools, and we work together on it. And then they'll come to me a couple of weeks later and they'll be like, all of the things that I've tried, that all of my plan, it just doesn't work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that
Because
happen
we
to you?
have to go because we have to go down a different avenue, because
Mm-hmm.
there are parts to ourselves. There's the part that is avoidant, there's the part that's anxious, there's the part that overfunctions, there's the part that underfunctions, there's the part that knows how to play, there's the part that knows how to be joyful. So we have multiple parts within us, and if we're doing the coping strategy that is not congruent with the part, then it's not going to necessarily work. So if we're being driven by our overfunctioning part, then the coping strategy that says work harder is not necessarily going to work to alleviate that.
It's gonna keep it in that energy.
It's going to keep it in that energy, and it's going to get louder and louder and louder. And then you're not going to be able to listen to the other parts who are sitting in the corner whispering, saying, but we could go for a walk and we might feel better. Right?
Let's just have a shower.
Yeah. And I think so. And I think it's about finding the compatible strategy to the part of you that's ruling in the moment, because the part that's ruling in the moment is the part that's scared and is trying to make you feel safe again. But it's not the part that has the coping strategy you necessarily need.
Yeah. That's a really, really good way of phrasing it. I appreciate that. Can you, so we have that. You also said something earlier that I want to return to, which is this healing crisis that we sometimes experience, and that it feels like everything's getting worse before it gets better. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's multiple ways of describing this in different traditions. Some people call it the dark night of the soul. Some people call it a healing crisis. So there's often this pivotal moment. We'll have multiple of them in our lives, but the more you've had them and the more you know that to trust them also. So when we come to this healing crisis, it's this moment where I would say our higher self knows that we can't keep doing what we're doing. And it often comes in the form of grief or another trauma or an illness, a divorce, something that comes where it's like, you can't keep along the path you're doing. We need to restructure this. And that healing crisis is so scary most of the time. So it often mine came with panic attacks. It came with my hair falling out from the autoimmune thing. It came with rashes. It came with stomach and gut issues. But it was so loud that I knew I could no longer ignore it, because it had been 15 years at that point where I was like, oh yeah, I've worked on that. I don't want to really, like, I don't need to look at it again. Because I think this is the thing about
part coming up.
Yeah, because these are the thing about healing too, is we also are sold this illusion of humanity that you will heal something once and you'll never need to look at it again.
Yeah.
So, but you having lost your hair at 7 means something totally different at 12, means something totally different at 22, means something totally different now. And you have to look at it from different angles at different times for different reasons. And there's other times where it's in the background and it's fine. And it sort of feels like it's healed to as much as it can be at any given time. But we're all told we'll sort of heal it once and that'll be it. And so I had been under the illusion that I'd healed it many, many times. And then the autoimmune condition was this, like, you can't keep doing what you're doing. So on the other side, it seems really lovely. It's like, oh, look, Michelle and Sheridan have worked through their stuff and they've healed.
Look at
something.
them up
Right.
there.
Look at how amazing they are. No,
We're just
absolutely
like, no.
not. No, because none of us have it together. We have it figured out until we don't again. Yeah. So that healing crisis, it does tend to last sort of 6 months to a year and a half, where there's this complete restructuring where you can't keep going. But on the other side of that healing crisis, there's freedom. There's like, oh, I know myself even better. I love myself even more than I did. I understand myself more than I ever did. I think sometimes it takes a healing crisis for us to actually think it's worthwhile to make the change.
Yeah, and I think that's a really human thing. And, you know, if you look at the phases of change, one of them is like, you have to identify the pain of staying where you are before you're going to have the motivation to make a change. That's a really human thing, because you only have a certain amount of resources. Like, it has to be worth your while, as shallow as that might sound. And it's not like a bad thing. It's just, your brain is doing that. It's just, it makes sense. It's like something that sometimes people say to me is, they're like, well, you know, how do I know what I need to focus on next? Like, how do I know where my next thing is that I need to heal? And I always just want to be like, it'll slap you in the face. Okay. Just enjoy this time.
Yes. And I also want to say this, we also have a bit of this striving that happens in self-help too, where it's like, what's the next thing I'm going to work on? I know I am so guilty of this. Oh my goodness. And it's like, okay, how come you don't know how to rest and play then?
Yeah.
How come I don't understand that it's okay to just enjoy something flowing without having to? And I think this is very human too. We can graduate with our master's degree and the next day we're like, well, that was nice, but what's the next thing that I'm looking for? Right. Like, so I think there's this desire, we're all constantly craving something, but we don't always need to be working on something. Yeah. And sometimes working on something doesn't mean it has to be this extensive project. It doesn't mean you have to journal every day and write a book about it and create something out of it. It can be contemplation. It can be mindfulness without having to. So what happens with a lot of my clients is they'll come in and say, like, tell me the 5 things I can do about this. And sometimes there's actually not a do. Sometimes there's like, I want you to sit, you are doing it. You're doing it in thinking about it and experiencing it and just being in it. There's not necessarily something you need to do about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially, you know, people who are here, you beautiful listeners, the fact that you're listening to this podcast tells me that you're doing the things. You're thinking about it. You've written in your journal about it. You've probably spoken to your friend or maybe a therapist or something. You're doing the things, which is really beautiful and really amazing. And we have to allow and teach our body that it's safe to not do the things. Teach our body that boredom is safe. Teach our body that, what's the word I'm looking for? The opposite to spontaneous.
That it's
the mundane.
That it's okay to be bored. I think most of us don't really understand that it's okay to be bored sometimes because it is uncomfortable. And I think energetically, it brings up this idea of doing, whereas I see doing as sort of a masculine energy, that it's, or like quantifiable. We can put numbers and really like tangible things, and we need that. But we need the other half of the energy, which is more feminine, which is qualitative. So it's about story. It's about being able to sit in something and it being less tangible, it being a bit more ethereal. And the ethereal things that we're working on are not less valid than the things we can tick off a list and say, I did this thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we're creating a life where there's more ease and more abundance and more nourishing relationships, it is essential that we learn to sit in more of that ethereal energy, because that's when the other things kind of say, oh, you're a soft place to land. I'm going to go to you. How beautiful. I want to be around you. That's where sex happens. That's where polarity happens. That's where money gets to become easy. That's where you get to really feel love for your body. That's where more sustainable relationships, friendships, and things can really nourish and thrive and flourish.
Yeah, this is
Yeah,
mindfulness. This is
thank you.
mindfulness. So this is when we're in the flow. So when we were talking about like fight, fawn, freeze, the opposite of that is the other F, which is flow. And when we're in flow, we're mindful. These are the situations where you're sitting with a friend or a partner and you're having an amazing deep conversation and you don't even want to go get another cup of tea or go to the washroom because you might break the magic of the moment, of that flow with another person where you're co-creating something. Or when you actually are in meditation and you're like, oh, I'm actually feeling that thing that I've been wanting to feel in meditation, which happens, probably only 10 to 20% of the time, where you get kind of buzzy and you feel really grounded in your body. That's that flow, that's that mindfulness state. Or you're walking, you're being mindful where you're walking, and the sunset and the picture and the colors are just perfect. And for the split second, our heart opens up and it's just like, oh yes, this is what the meaning of life is.
Oh, yes, 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 yes. So Michelle, how do we get there? What is this? What would, for our listeners, if they're sitting and they're thinking, oh, hey, that sounds really nice. I would like more of that.
I think one of the first things is you have to understand that you deserve it. You have to understand that you're capable. And even as I was describing that, every single one of us has a moment, even if it's just for a split second, where our body knows what that feels like. So even Sheridan, as you touched your chest and you went, oh yes, we have a remembering of this place. So I want the listeners to know, to remember yourself home to that place. So sometimes mindfulness can be even for just a moment here, think about that sunset, that beautiful place you feel completely peaceful, the animals or the children in your life, a plant, something that trees, whatever it is that evokes beauty for you. We can bring that up as a familiar feeling in our bodies, just as much as I could say, think about what scares you the most, and it immediately shows up in your body,
Yeah.
right? So we forget that as much as we can pull up our worst fear, we also, as much as we forget to, we can also pull up the beauty. We can pull up joy. We can say, I'm going to think about the thing that creates joy for me. And even if it happens for 2 seconds, this is the lovely thing about the flow state. You can spend 99.9% of your time in panic, but if you spend 0.2% of your time saying, but I felt joy for a split second, that joy shines light into all that other place. Your body goes, oh yes, we do have the capacity for this.
Yeah.
And then we can do all the strategies, right? Then you can also do all the strategies. But I think it's also about remembering that we do know what joy and contentment feels like in our bodies.
Yeah. And sometimes I think that I like that you use the word capacity, because sometimes it's about building the capacity to do that. You and I have been practicing for a really, really long time how to do these things. And I think I can at least speak for myself that my capacity to be happy and to bounce back from all of the crazy stuff that goes on in this world. And when I say bounce back, really what I mean is just land in a soft place more regularly.
Yeah.
has grown because I, at some point, said, enough is enough. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to evoke that feeling inside. I'm going to find the part of me that knows what it feels like to feel nurtured. I'm going to sit and I'm going to think about the things that I love. I'm going to eat breakfast and look at the trees because that feels better than eating and watching YouTube. And I'm going to find those little moments. I'm going to get support because it reminds me how to get back there. I'm going to go to a class because it reminds me how to get back there. But it's the action, I believe, it's the action that actually concretes and integrates the belief of, yeah, I do deserve this. I do deserve this, and I'm going to do it. And that's going to remind me that I deserve it.
And then I think what that does, Sheridan, is then that creates this ability to have more gratitude and compassion, so that when we are flooded, when we're doing the people pleasing or the perfectionism or the anxiety, or our mind is racing, telling us all sorts of nonsense, which it does, we can then also have the capacity to turn to the part of us that's anxious and say, thank you very much. I understand what you're trying to do. I understand that you're trying to keep me safe right now. And I understand that that's an old pattern. And thank you for that, because we also try to banish the parts of us that we don't like, instead of seeing them as beautiful early warning systems that something is out of balance. And if
Early
we've
warning
noticed
system.
that something is out of balance, then we can do something about it. If we don't know it's out of balance, then we're walking mindlessly through life.
And that's the thing. We've all walked mindlessly through life.
Yeah,
We
every single
probably do it
day.
and don't realize.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
I want everybody to know too that there's a duality within humanity as well, where we get to this, well, there's only the happy people and the not happy people. No, we are all happy in a day, content in a day, grieving in a day, angry, anxious, whatever it is. But we pay attention to the ones that feel dangerous. We don't pay attention to the ones that feel good. And that's where that gratitude and mindfulness practice, because we turn and we look at the other half of us that is okay. And sometimes we're not joyful. And sometimes, like you say, that soft place to land or just being okay is enough. And I think our culture is bad for this, because we do look around at other people and compare and say, well, this other person has more success than me, or this person looks more beautiful on Instagram than I do, or, whatever it is. So we are always looking outside of ourselves, thinking someone else has something we don't have. But there's just as many people looking back at us thinking, well, I want what she has, right?
It's all perspective. Yeah, it really, really is. It really, really is. So guys, your job is to find those little moments while you're washing the dishes to remember that they are early warning signs. When you notice that you're going into that, be happy that you noticed that you went into that. Good work.
Yeah, because we can't banish the hard parts of being human either. And also have some compassion if even just the realization doesn't fix it overnight. Like sometimes it took us a while to get into a place of out of balance. It takes us a little while to get back into balance too. So once we've had that realization that we're not maybe as mindful as we'd like to be, it might take 2 days, 3 months, 6 months, however it is for you,
couple of
years to get back to this place where you feel like you're coming home to yourself again. So it doesn't sort of magically happen just because you've had the thought either, right? So also just extending yourself some grace.
Yeah. And you have it. You have that patience and that grace inside of you. It happens more easily when you're regulated, but it's there even if the point of view that you're looking at the world from today says, I need it right now. And I can only, like, this is the only way that I feel. And I can only see one point of view. You still have patience and grace inside of you. We have just temporarily put on blinders and forgotten, but trust me that they are there. Find your tool, find the corresponding tool to your state, to your part, and you will guide yourself back home to that patience and grace.
One of the things I think happens as well is that we start to identify with the feeling. So we start to say, and I know I did this for years, I would say, I am anxious. So as if this was the character of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I would start to practice, instead of saying I am anxious as if that is who I am in my identity, I would start to say, okay, I am anxious. No, I feel anxious. Then I would drill it down to I'm feeling the energy of anxiety in my body. And then I would land on I'm just feeling energy.
Yeah. And when you do that, that's what I try and teach, or that's what I teach all of my clients is I have energy inside of me. The emotions are energy in motion. I started doing that a couple of years ago. And now that as you're speaking, I'm actually realizing at some point that I don't even know when happened, just stopped identifying as an anxious person.
Yeah, I did
I,
too.
I know that when did that happen? It just happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
mine came through my healing crisis. So ironically, my healing crisis was like a year of panic attacks. And then at the end of it, as I did look back and say, well, when did the anxiety go?
Yeah.
And it's interesting when I'm with family and friends, here's a dynamic that happens too, is that my family and friends know me as a 3-year-old who's anxious and a 12-year-old who's anxious and a 30-year-old who's anxious. And they don't necessarily know me as a 40-something that isn't anxious anymore because they see me in my younger states. So people who've known us for a really long time too will say, well, are you okay with that, Michelle? Because I know that makes you anxious. So they'll also try to kind of put me back in the role that I embodied for so long. And then it feels really good for me to be like, oh yeah, they know me. They know the part of me that's anxious. I'm glad they're tending to that. But I'm also like, I also get a chance to say, no, I'm good now. I'm okay. Right?
Yeah. 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 And I also know that I think it's really, Michelle, that's a really beautiful way to see it. I'm happy you see it. And also, I know that some people don't see it like that. They kind of see it as like a negative, or they're like, oh, they think I'm like this. They just assume. And it actually can be really activating, or
It
like,
took
oh,
me a while to get there. It took me a while to get there
yeah,
until I felt really confident in knowing that the anxiety was behind me. So there was the period of time where it was behind me, but I didn't trust it yet. And in that period of time, yes, I was like, why is everybody trying to force me back into this old role? Why don't they see me for like, so there was a
who I
period of
am.
time there. And now I don't hear it as much, which also makes me really happy because it means they're also seeing what I'm experiencing, which is, and I feel sad for the amount of times my partner, my sister, they bent themselves into shape because of my activation, because I
Yeah.
wasn't safe in the world too.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you do the safety work, when you find that safety inside, when you are mindful, when you are present, when you are compassionate, wow, what a gift it is to every single person that comes into contact with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I never really realized there was a flow over effect to anyone else either. Like I really thought I was just, I could do it to myself and it didn't have any impact on anyone. I really didn't understand that the people who loved me were also watching my suffering and feeling helpless and being able to do anything about that.
Yeah, Andres and I, my partner, we filmed a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him like what it was like for him to experience me having hair loss. And I knew how he was feeling, but even then, like going back and listening as I'm sharing it, he was expressing how helpless it made him feel and how really difficult it was for him. And I had that newfound sense of compassion. I was like, wow, like I was so in my experience. And I think, I had a right to be. And I didn't see how much I was overflowing and really impacting, and how difficult it is for everyone when one person is not okay, and how that changes the dynamics between you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the inverse is true too. The more compassionate, the more mindful, the more self-compassion you have, the more benefit everybody around does too, because the more we heal ourselves, the more we have the ability to light up everyone else around us too, and make it okay to talk about that, healing is okay, that healing's a good thing, that,
Mm.
mindfulness is a good thing. And it's sort of that those good feelings become contagious too.
Oh, they're so contagious, so contagious. And it's a really good reminder and to everyone that you can have experienced trauma or chronic stress or just being having that healing crisis. And there's a way out and it won't last forever. Yeah. Yeah.
And you might
Beautiful.
have to revisit again, but every time you revisit it after you've healed it, it's not scary anymore in the same way. It's like, oh, I know I can do this, right? And I know that it's worth it. Yeah.
Yes. And that was, I think, the biggest thing that inspired me. I was like, that's why I want to help people bounce back so much, because I kind of came to that realization of like, oh, this is just going to keep going for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get good at this.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to be 80 and still doing the things at 20 that didn't work for me. Right. And I also want to be 80 and saying, oh my goodness, I discovered something new about me and my patterns too, because I think we all know ourselves so well. And the paradox is at exactly the same time, we don't know who we are. So it's at all. And so I'm excited also, like when I discover new elements of myself, it's really exciting. It's like, oh, I didn't realize that those two things were connected. And now that I realize that, I know what I know, and now I can do something about it.
Dear listener, before we wrap the end of this episode up, I want you to know that I see you. I know that you're ready to bounce back from difficulties of your life quickly and with more ease by having the tools to regulate your nervous system and find inner peace instead of inner conflict. I know you're ready to embrace life's challenges and stresses and feel confident to take on whatever comes your way, including anxiety or anger, to move through them without manipulating them, without having to spend eternity in uncertainty, sticky emotions, and physical discomfort. You are ready to celebrate the growth of yourself, your relationship, your finances, without experiencing shame or guilt when you're doing it quicker than those around you. Which is why I'm extending an invitation to you to book an expansion call, where we will dive even deeper on exactly what you need in your personal situation to make this a reality, to go from overwhelmed managing big emotions and perhaps going into anxiety or depression to overflowing abundance, ease, and certainty. You'll get free support around your unique situation, and we will also discuss whether or not working through my ease framework in a one-on-one capacity is the best fit for you right now on your journey of becoming more resilient and regulated. Use the link in the show notes to lock in your call ASAP. Yeah, and how amazing to think that life is always going to have this really wonderful story to tell, that it's like you're out on an adventure and you just get to go and figure it all out, and like there's going to be all these like random things that you don't know, and like discoveries and treasure chests and then caves to adventure through. Like, isn't that fun?
Yeah. It is. Yeah. And the story of that, we get to change it too. Like we get to say that was the story I told at one time, and now I'm telling a different story about it, right?
Yeah. Beautiful. So Michelle, for our wonderful listeners, I will make sure that there are links below so that they can reach out with you, they can inquire. I know that you do have some really great resources out there. So can you kind of give us an idea of what they're going to be able to get more from you from?
Yeah. So if you go over to my website, illuminatedpathcounseling.com, you'll see all the links to my things. So I have a trauma recovery course, which is about rediscovering resiliency and healing through mindfulness. I have a meditation through the senses course. I've also got a whole bunch more courses coming out in the next few months. And I'd really love if you could join me over those. And I will say that those courses come from, yes, my education. That's what anchors it. But every single thing that I have in those courses are things that I do myself, things that I've found to work. I never do anything in there that I haven't done myself in my own healing journey. And you can also find me over on socials at Illuminated Path Counseling. I try to release videos of just little tips and tricks about how to be mindful and what it actually means to be flooded and perfectionism and all the things we kind of talked about today.
Yeah, everything is tried and tested in this corner of the internet. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Michelle. A big and special thanks to Upturned for composing this magical piece of music, and to GS Studios for mixing it. find upturns, other tracks, or ask for your own special custom piece of music, go say hello using their contact details in the show notes.